What's up, guys? I just want to hop on for a second to explain the new structure for World's Strongest Man events this year, because I just made my video about the heats predictions. If you haven't seen it yet, go ahead and go watch that. I dive deep into who I think is going to make it through each group and who's going to make it to the final, with some more details on what I think their prospective performances might be. And so go check that out if you haven't seen it yet. But today we're gonna hop into what's changed about World's Strongest Man this year and why this could lead to some very different results than what people think. Okay, so starting off with a brief explanation of what they've done in previous years. Basically what happened was there were 5 groups of 6 guys. First place in each group at the end of the heats would automatically make it through to the final. 2 and 3 would have to do what's called a stone off, where there's a line of Atlas stones. They go through the series, passing them back and forth to each other until the final stone, where the last man standing gets to go through to the final. If you're in third place, you have to start, which is your disadvantage. And so that's how they used to settle things going into the finals. And the problem with that is that one person would be way more exhausted than whoever made it through in first place, which you could argue is like a, okay, you should have gotten into first place then sort of thing or whatever, but it really just led to some unfair performances. For example, Brian Shaw in 2023 got absolutely cooked in the stone off, and he didn't perform as well as he normally would have in some of the finals events just because he was so exhausted from what I believe was an 11 rep stone off battle between him and Rauno Heinla. So that's an example of why things may be a little bit disadvantageous to somebody who had to go into the stone off, and why no stone off, which we'll get into a little bit later, is a lot more fair. Another detail about how they used to do the finals is once the top 10 from all of the guys made it through to the finals would start with 0 points across the board. So everyone started fresh. So as long as you had good events in the finals, then you would have a better chance of making it through because your points before didn't matter at all throughout the heats, which is one of the things that they changed about this year that I'm really excited to talk about. A final detail about what they used to do is they used to have a rest day between the 2-day heats and the 2-day finals. So you'd have a chance to take a little bit of a break and kind of recoup before the finals, which is something that some guys liked, some guys didn't. Those with better conditioning would probably have fared better without a rest day, and those with worse conditioning would have definitely fared better with a rest day. And to briefly explain some parts of the new structure for the 2025 World's Strongest Man, it's now 5 groups of 5 guys instead of 6, which kind of condenses the field for a more competitive lineup overall because you don't have as many guys. Once you get past about 20 guys, it can sometimes be hard to find guys that are the quality that you're looking for a World's Strongest Man performance, because you're just trying to fill a lineup. So with 25 guys, that makes it a lot easier to find the real top 25, as opposed to just kind of finding some filler in between once you get past 20 or 25 guys. Secondly, what they're doing now is the points in the heats for the top 10 guys that make it to the final will now count. So to briefly explain that, let's say, for example, in my finals prediction video, in Group 1, I have Austin Andrade and Tom Stoltman making it to the final. In the final, if Tom did better in the heats events than Austin, he would go into the final with more points. And so what they're gonna do is take all the 10 guys that made it to the final, and they're gonna score them against each other throughout all the heats events as if it was just those 10 guys that competed. And so what this does is it basically means that people like Tom Stoltman and Mitchell Hooper, who in years past were just able to kind of skate through the heats events and not really try that hard because they could just beat everyone else in their group and be fine, it now means that they're going to be scored against each other. So going all out in the heats is going to lead to a more advantageous position in the final, especially for guys like Tom Stoltman, Mitchell Hooper, a Lucas Hatton, for example, who I believe are some of the best guys in this lineup. They're going to have to try now so that they can have an advantage potentially over their competitors once they get to the final. And as I mentioned before, there's now no stone off in the heats. So what they're going to do is everyone in the heats is going to compete in all 5 events, and they're just taking the top 2. The last thing that they changed that's a big major update is that there's now no rest day between the 2-day heats and the 2-day finals. So it's just all 4 days, back to back, best man wins, which can be good and can be bad. As I stated before, guys with better conditioning and better recovery windows are going to perform better in a situation like this because they don't need that recovery time that some other guys might, and they're still going to be fresh after only 2 days of competition. I personally like these changes. I think that they're great, and I think that they definitely will benefit some athletes, and your weaknesses will be exposed. Because as a strongman athlete, you really should be conditioned and strong. You shouldn't just be strong. So if you're just strong, you're going to get exposed in this format because of the way that the finals are set up with no rest day in between. I do have a few critiques of this specific World's Strongest Man. The format updates are great, but there are a few things that I think that they're still doing wrong with this one that could definitely be improved and could lend itself to a better and more fair competition. Firstly, I think that the events in this heats section are a little bit too light. It's almost like there's two competitions going on. There's a more fast-paced and endurance-based competition up front, and there's a heavier, more static competition in the final. This, in my opinion, isn't the best test of who's really the world's strongest man, because some of the guys that are more endurance-based and faster are going to be able to make it through to the final and be performing better than some guys who might miss out on the final, but are actually stronger. So that's just something that I think this World's Strongest Man, while it is moving in the right direction, still got just a little bit wrong. Secondly, one that's much more difficult logistically, but I feel like in practice and in theory would lend itself to a better competition overall, is that all 25 athletes should just compete together. I've seen lots of people saying this, and that would be a very difficult competition when it comes to the video aspect of it and the logistics of all 25 guys competing against each other. But it really would lend itself to seeing who's the strongest out of the 25, because if all the guys competed together, you're really gonna find who's the best overall. And my final critiques of this World's Strongest Man are really just things that have been said a bunch before. There's still no live stream because of the TV contract. The TV edit of it, unfortunately, cuts out a lot of fun performances. I had a buddy of mine last year who competed named Marcus Crowder, who performed well in a few of the events, but in the TV edit, you barely saw him in any of the videos because he didn't make it through to the final, unfortunately, and didn't really do anything incredibly amazing standout performance-wise. So you lost that performance because the TV edit didn't really see it as that important, which from my perspective, I just imagine, let's say that I was competing at World's Strongest Man and I want my family to be able to see me compete at World's Strongest Man because this may be my only chance. And if the TV edit cuts me out basically completely, then I've now lost that memory in the TV edit version for my family to watch when it comes time for it to premiere. And finally, one of the things about World's Strongest Man recently that's kind of something that I think that they should improve on is that it's been in the United States for the past few years. This is kind of one of the more negligible things that makes it somewhat of a subpar competition when it comes to the athlete travel time that it takes to get over here. If you're from Canada or the United States, it's really not as much of a chore for you to travel to World's Strongest Man as, for example, let's say Eddie Williams, who lives in Australia, and it's like, I don't know, like a 500 hours of flight from Australia over here to the United States. That sucks, and that really takes a wear and tear on an athlete before they compete in possibly the biggest competition of their lives. And so, in the interest of fairness, I feel like it should definitely travel over to places like Europe and Australia and Africa, because that definitely lends itself to a more fair competition if one group of people, like, for example, it was in Myrtle Beach last year. I live here in Raleigh, North Carolina, and that would have been about a 4-hour drive for me. A 4-hour drive to World's Strongest Man versus a 20-hour flight is completely different, and I'm gonna be way more fresh than somebody who had to fly for 20 hours. So I feel like that's one of the things they could still improve on when it comes to the fairness of the competition. In conclusion, this is all a major step in the right direction. All the things that they've changed this year with the points and the structure, especially getting rid of the stone off, I think are all major steps in the right direction toward what we want to see, especially as fans from World's Strongest Man. Now, things can always improve, like the critiques that I just gave. Those things are major steps in the right direction, and so they are improving. And as a fan, one of the things that I always remind myself, and one of my final thoughts in my conclusion, is that as a fan, you really need to keep making your voice heard. Now, we can't all be Mitchell Hooper level of impact where he just says something and they have to listen because he's one of the star athletes, right? But this World's Strongest Man, the event changes and the structure changes are proof that World's Strongest Man is listening to the fans. So we need to keep making our voice heard and keep being the input that World's Strongest Man needs to keep improving, because they are obviously, at least partially, listening to what the fans want. So keep making your voice heard, and we're gonna keep seeing things that we want to improve at World's Strongest Man. And yeah, those are my basic thoughts for this year's World's Strongest Man. I hope I explained things eloquently enough that the structure and the format really makes sense. If you guys have any more questions or things that I didn't cover, please leave them down in the comments. If you have any inputs about what you think they should change that I didn't bring up, again, please leave it down in the comments. Love to talk about it. And thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time.